Hi, my name is Caden Dixon, and I'm part of the statutes group along with Brennan, Dan, Jed, Steph, and Miguel. We will all be doing this project together. However, we are turning in our assignments or our video assignments separately. I will be a part of the statutes group. However, the first portion of the compare and contrast and how it relates to executive orders as well as treaties. But to really understand how a statute compares or contrasts to an executive order, we will first truly understand what an executive order is, how it affects us, examples we've seen within society, and how that really impacts us today. What is it really an executive order? Well, an executive order is a declaration by the president or governor or any governing force, which has the force of a law, usually based already on existing statutory powers. We do see an example by George H. Bush, to be exact, Executive Order 12724, and how he based a lot of his executive orders already on the Emergency Economic Powers Act. We also see it based largely on the National Emergencies Act. We do see a lot of these executive orders already priorly placed on existing statutory powers, existing statutes already put into place. But they do not require any action by the Congress or state legislators to take effect. This really means that much like how a statute or a law needs to go through a process through different judicial areas, through the Congress, through many forms of branches in order to get established. Executive order is purely does not require anything by the Congress or state legislature to take effect, only needed by the governor or the president. Um, the characteristics of an executive order is that the issue, once it put into place, the order directs the actions of the federal government. So once this is put into place, this is how the federal government chooses to act from then on. It must specify the authority. However, when put into place, it must specify the authority or the authority that was given to them in order to create such an order. It is usually specified either through the Constitution or through a law already established. But once an executive order is established, it has the force of a law. Courts can rule this unconstitutional, or the Congress can refuse to spend money or they can pass legislation in order to invalidate such a law. However, this tends to get thwarted often by the president, as the president can either create another executive order in order to get funding, or the once Congress attempts to make a statute in order to refute the executive order, is often that the president vetoes such a statute. So one of the most famous executive orders of American history is the Emancipation Proclamation of January 1st of 1863. This is put into place by Abraham Lincoln through his presidency to declare the freedom of slaves throughout the Confederacy. However, when this was put in place, obviously just the Union at the time. Every president from George Washington, Obama, Donald Trump, Joe Biden has used them. More than 13,000 in one form or another have been issued since 1789. And while there is no necessarily provision within the Constitution that gives presidents the power in order to have an executive authority or an executive order, they do see within Article 2 of the Constitution that gives them the grant of executive power. And so we often see presidents throughout history give themselves that power or state within that executive power that is within their right to be able to give an executive order. We do see the most recent executive order within at least recent history was within Joe Biden on September 9th that often affected a lot of us of COVID-19. We do see that President Joe Biden signed 14042 that required the vaccination against a lot of COVID-19 employees, as well as federal contractors and federal employees. This included police officers, medical professionals, Secret Service, anything within the federal department. But this inevitably led more and more private contractors, private businesses to also require the vaccination as well in order to get into public events, sporting events, and such. How are these similar to statutes or not? In, excuse me, the overall process of this. But once an executive order is put into place by the president, it is not thwarted by, let's say, the judicial branch to be overturned as unconstitutional. They do have the same power as a law or a statute. They do have the same inevitable power that must be followed by all citizens, all governments to inevitably be followed, but they both can be overturned by the court. A statute and an executive order may be overturned by the court if deemed unconstitutional by it. And both can overrule. The president has the power in both sanctions, both a statute and an executive order, to overrule Congress through veto, or typically through veto, or if it's through a funding issue, through another executive order. We do see the president having the majority of the power when it comes to statutes or executive orders. As Congress creates a statute, the president has the power to veto or affirm that statute, just as with this, they have the power to even create the executive order. Now, what are the differences between these? Now, with an executive order, this is a power exclusive to the president. And though this is a power exclusive president, we do not see it given within the Constitution, unlike a statute. But we also see a lot issues that are different from statutes. We do see funding issues with executive orders because a lot of these orders aren't necessarily only laws to be put in place, but also like events to be followed, to different things to be put into place in order to lift up our economy or lift up whatever it may be. But we do see a lot of funding issues within, excuse me, funding issues within executive orders that we do not often see within statutes. An example being the vaccination. We do see funding required to be able to vaccinate that many individuals. Now, the next topic I have is within treaties. How do statutes relate to treaties? Well, a treaty is a formal and binding written agreement entered into by actors of typically international law, usually sovereign states or international organizations. Now, where do we even see these powers come from? Now, we see within the president, the Constitution that provides that the president shall have the power, and by the advice and consent of the senators, to make treaties, provide that 2/3 of the senators concur with the treaty. Treaties are binding agreements between two nations that become part of international law, but where we really see this is in Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution as well, that provides the president the power to do so. However, it is required that the Senate concurs in order to make it fully a treaty. But what does it look like today? It is really important to note that presidents have frequently entered into the U.S. into international agreements without the advice and consent of the Senate. Now, how this is important to note is because it's very different from a treaty, as these are executive agreements, as the Senate does not agree. It is very highly looked upon that we do get the Senate to agree, as we do find a binding nation is a much stronger nation. So when we do see that the president does this without the authority or without the consent of the Senate, we call this an executive agreement. However, executive agreements, though still important to note, are binding under international law. So where do we find the treaties and statutes to be similar? Well, much like how a statute is domestically a law that everyone must follow, we do find that treaties are the law of the land on international grounds overseas. We do see that these are the laws that must be followed to every country that is put within the treaty. These must be followed to a T, and much like a statute, they must be followed overseas, excuse me. But these are also powers granted within the Constitution, both statutes and treaties, to the president, both within Article 2, to be able to create laws both in international and domestic affairs. But how do they differ? Well, the obvious difference is with a treaty is more of an international affair, international law, whereas with a statute, we see more domestic laws being obtained. With an international treaty, this is the U.S. as an entity must follow law against a European country as an entity, an Asian country as an entity, African country, whatever it may be. Whereas with a statute, is a law followed within the United States that can be enforced within the United States. And then with the other major difference is how they're really created. Well, as we see both to my left and my right here, we see the ways that they're created. A statute is created by the Congress creating a set of statutes, a set of laws in order to be passed, to have the president affirm or deny them. However, when it comes to a treaty, it's actually the president coming up with the treaties with foreign affairs, then to be accepted or to be consented by the Senate. Obviously, as we figured out before, it's not necessarily required, but it's highly looked upon as well. So the real main differences is how it is an international agreement versus a domestic agreement, as well as the difference being between Congress creating the law versus the president being creating the law as consented by the Senate. Now, I hope you have the good rest of your day. This is the end of my portion of the presentation. But thank you for your time and have a blessed day.